Zoom call today. To begin, we would like to acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. We also further recognize that Laurentian University and Science North are both located on the traditional lands of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabe, and that the greater city of Sudbury also includes the traditional lands of the Wahnapitae First Nation. This is our fifth in a six-part seminar series. Welcome to those who have joined us today for this engaging topic. Despite the challenge we are all facing, isn't it incredible how technology has brought us together in a way we would not have imagined beforehand? As the Associate Vice President Academic and Francophone Affairs, I have seen firsthand the engagement and willingness of our exceptionally talented researchers and faculty members at Laurentian University to support the fight against COVID-19. En tant que vice-recteur associé aux études et aux affaires francophones, j'ai pu constater de première main l'engagement et la volonté de nos chercheurs exceptionnellement talentueux de soutenir la lutte contre le COVID-19. I'm also very excited to be working alongside our neighbors and exceptional science communicators from Science North. This partnership has already proven to be very successful in jointly presenting the seminar series to thousands of people to date. Mille merci à nos collègues à Science Nord. I would now like to introduce to you Katrina Pisani. Katrina is a staff scientist at Science North, and she will help facilitate and guide us through the next hour. Good morning, Katrina.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. And hi, everyone who is joining us. This is super exciting. We have three fantastic panelists joining us today. So each one is going to have a bit of a different focus, and we're going to learn a lot from them. So let's get started. Today, we are going to talk about the importance of health and wellness during this pandemic, and specifically in different occupational settings and in different workplaces. So first up, we have Dr. Allison Goodwin, who is an associate professor at the School of Human Kinetics, and she also is a researcher for the Center for Research in Occupational Safety and Health, which a lot of us also know as CROSH, so that might be a term that you have heard before. Her research focuses on the use of virtual and augmented reality to enhance different training experiences for industry in Northern Ontario. So, Allison, you're there?
I am here. Thank you.
There we go.
Awesome. So today I wanted to go back to my roots, which really started in ergonomics, and that was where I got my start in occupational settings. And ergonomics is particularly important from a wellness and health perspective because a lot of us have been thrown into the situation where we're now working from home. And some of us were lucky and maybe had a home office set up. The rest of us are sitting at the kitchen table, likely. And whereas a kitchen table is great for things like eating, and if at my house it lasts about 45 seconds before the children are gone. You can tolerate sitting at the kitchen table for a little while, but it's not really well suited for doing long periods of work in some fairly static positions, which is what happens when you try to use your office equipment there. So I thought I would give you a few tips and things to watch for. Maybe it will help spark some ideas about how you can tweak your setup and start to reduce the likelihood of developing a musculoskeletal disorder, which we certainly don't want to happen during this time that we're working at home. And so a lot of you are probably working from a laptop. That's the most common mode that people have their computers these days. And I'm going to give you some ideas of when or the postures that you want to get into. So ideally, you would like for your shoulders to be in a fairly neutral, relaxed posture. Unfortunately, kitchen tables are a little bit high, and you might start to notice that your shoulders are rising up. That's going to cause some tension in those muscles that connect from your shoulder complex to your neck. And fairly quickly, you'll probably start noticing you might have headaches and other sensations in your shoulders and maybe down your arms. So you want a nice neutral shoulder posture. And from there, you would like your arm to be in a neutral posture, approximately 90 degrees at the elbow. And from there, you would want your arm to fall sort of naturally down to a nice position at the hands and wrists. Now, if you can get your shoulder and your arm into a nice position with the laptop scenario, I can guarantee that probably your head is not going to be in a good situation. And this is just because the computer screen is going to be too low, and you might be noticing that you're tipping your head downwards. The simplest way to solve this kind of a problem is to remove the input devices from the actual laptop screen. And so the cheapest way to do that really would just be have a wireless keyboard and mouse that you would add to your setup. And that would be a fairly cheap, $50 solution that would get you in a better position. And the position that then you would like to be in is that if you can get your hands and your shoulders in a nice neutral position at the table, then you'd want to raise your laptop. And definitely you could do that with some simple textbooks or cookbooks that are just sitting around, maybe not being used, and you could simply raise your laptop. And the sort of the guideline that we would like to be at is that when your laptop is in a good position, your eyes would be in line with about the top third of the screen. And so that would now get your head in a good position and your arms and your wrists in a good position. You want to make sure that your forearms and your wrists aren't sort of pivoting against the hard edge of the surface that you're working on. And that can be another problem. You'll start to feel some pain, maybe some contact pressure, some issues through your wrist, perhaps even some carpal tunnel type feelings that are starting to happen there. And that probably means that you aren't up high enough actually so that your arms can fall naturally to the surface that you're working on. Another cheap solution is those nice gel mouse pads that came out in the 90s that people sometimes make fun of. But in this scenario, they might help to remove your arms from the surface of the surface that you're on. Now, if you're working at the kitchen table and you only have a kitchen chair, it's not going to have a lot of adjustability. The nice thing about our office setups is that we have all this adjustability we can play with. So when we're working from home, we definitely have to think of different ways to get that adjustability. I simply used a few cushions on my kitchen chair. That was able to bring me up high enough that my wrists were in a good position. But then my feet were dangling, and that's not good either because then you'll get pressure points on the backs of your thighs. Again, some of those cookbooks that aren't being used or even an empty box could go on the floor, and it would give a support for your feet, and then it would remove some of the pressure points under your legs. If you don't have something that you can get under, that's another key thing that we have to think about, is that you want to be able to get your legs under the table. So working at other scenarios or other surfaces which might be a better height aren't necessarily going to give you space for your knees and your legs to get underneath the workstation. So that's something to keep in mind. I've seen some really interesting ways that people are converting to standing work stations. And sometimes a counter is a good height to stand at. It's going to depend on how tall you are. But you can maybe identify a few different places throughout your home where you can move around throughout the day. And if you don't have a really ideal setup, maybe you have 3 different setups. And by doing a rotation, you're going to be able to reduce some of those bad postures that you don't want to have for prolonged periods of time. So those are a few key things to look at. Certainly if some questions come up, I can try to address them, or I can clarify anything that I've said so far. So I think I will pass it off to our next panelist, and hopefully you're already thinking about ways to make your workstation just a little bit better for these long days during the pandemic.
Amazing. Thank you, Allison, for that. And I was definitely sitting here checking out my workstation as you were talking. So I think I might have a little bit of fixing to do. So that's good to know. So for those of you that are just joining us, we're discussing the importance of health and wellness during this pandemic with some panelists from Laurentian University, some amazing speakers we have today. And if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments wherever you're watching. We want to hear from you, and we'll be able to take questions in a bit. So our next panelist is Dr. Diana Kollick. She is a clinical social worker, and she has a small private practice of her own, as well as a professor at Laurentian University. Her research focuses on studying the benefits of art-based mindfulness and using those types of interventions for resilience. So Diana, you are up next. Hi.
All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit today about mindfulness. Since 2005, I've been researching the benefits of mindfulness, which is a holistic philosophy and practice that helps us keep our focus in the present moment, which is the opposite of getting caught up in ruminating or feeling anxious, both of which pull you out of the present moment into the past or the future. So take a second right now and just think about how much time you spend in present moment awareness, where you're fully focused on what you're doing versus a state of distraction where you're doing things, but you're thinking about something else. So are you fully paying attention to this talk? Or are you multitasking by looking at your social media? Or are you here, but your mind is thinking about what you're going to do after this is over or what you're going to have for lunch? So, we're living in a time of great uncertainty and change, which for many of us can be emotionally and psychologically challenging as a place to be. Ideally, we need to learn to move beyond surviving to adapting to these circumstances, because it's obvious we're going to be living with this pandemic for a while. So it's normal right now to be feeling a lot of different things, both challenging and uplifting. So you might be feeling lonely, bored, a lack of motivation for school or work, anxiety, relationship strain, fears of getting sick or dying, sleep disruptions, and increased dreaming. On the other hand, you might be renewing your familial relationships, learning to cook and appreciating your garden, and realizing what really matters to you in life. So this crisis is providing us with an opportunity to go forward as people and communities in a different way. So a concept in mindfulness that's especially important is non-judgment of feelings and thoughts. So try and let go of expectations of how you, quote unquote, should feel. Try and approach your feelings and thoughts with curiosity, not judgment. Because to put it really simply, when you judge a feeling, you become stuck, and then that feeling builds up, which usually makes you feel worse. So mindful people don't judge their feelings. They try and figure them out so that they can deal with them. For example, if you're having an unmotivated morning, try and just accept that feeling. It's normal. And don't start being hard on yourself that you're not being productive, which is not helpful. Or another example, if you feel bad about crying, stop judging that and just let yourself do what you need to do. You might be surprised by the number of people that I work with that apologize to me when they start crying. I like to think of life, as a series of moments, so that we're moving from one moment to another moment. And we ride these moments out like a wave. So you know how a wave has a beginning and a crest and an end, rather than letting things build up and become worse. So sometimes these waves are very small, and other times they're much larger. So you might stay riding a wave for longer than you might like, but it's important that we understand that feeling our emotions is a vital part of getting better and staying healthy. It's normal to worry about future events. For example, I might begin worrying about what my classes are going to be like in the fall because we're going to be online. From a mindful perspective, what I want to do is be aware of when I begin worrying about something in the future, and then just bring myself back to the present moment where I can either move on to something else or I can address the anxiety that I feel. Otherwise, anxiety is a bit like a snowball, and it could quickly get away from you, which results in feeling really overwhelmed. If there are children in your life, validate their feelings. Sometimes there isn't anything to solve because a situation is not in your control to solve. For example, a lot of children are missing school right now and their friends. But listening to their feelings and normalizing them is really important. This teaches children that what they feel is valid and matters, and in turn can foster their resilience. So finally, focus on what you can control, not what you don't control. So we don't control decisions that others make or how they feel. You might feel right now like there's lots that is out of your control, but remind yourself that you control your values, how you act in the world and with others, and the choices we make about our feelings and our actions. So, for example, I might not like the fact that most people are not wearing masks when I go grocery shopping, but I wear a mask because I'm following guidance from public health and I want to be part of the solution to this crisis. So I might have a moment of frustration or anxiety when I go into the store, but I bring myself back to my own decisions and what I'm doing. So the last thing I kind of want to say for now is, all this being said, I don't want to diminish the seriousness of some people's challenges right now. And I guess I would say that, for example, if you or someone close to you is having suicidal thoughts or you're living with violence and abuse, you really should seek out support services. You could call 211 to start if you're not sure about what's available in our community. We also have a 24-hour crisis line in Sudbury and many other services that are available. All right, I will stop there.
Okay. Thank you for that. There was a lot of very helpful information in there. I think, we talk about this and we're all going through this situation, but we're all going through it in different ways. And so it's really helpful to understand how we can help ourselves and our families. So I think that that's just a wonderful thing to talk about. And I hope everybody out there can, appreciate that sometimes we all just need a little bit of help and we need to talk about this stuff. So thank you again, Diana, for that. So if you are joining us just in, we are talking with panelists from Laurentian University about the importance of health and wellness during the pandemic. Again, please send us your comments, send us your questions from wherever you're watching. We would love to answer them when we want to hear from you. We have one panelist left. So Dr. Sandra Dorman is our last speaker for this time. She is a professor in the Faculty of Health at Laurentian University and the director of CROSH, which is the Center for Research in Occupational Safety and Health. And her expertise is in the physiology and pharmacology, focusing her research in disease prevention, health promotion in an occupational setting, and her current research is dealing with incidences in workplaces that have fatigue-related injuries. So, Sandra, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'm going to dive in. I've got a lot to hopefully pass on. I want to talk to you about sleep today. Probably if you can remember before COVID, there was a lot of information in the news about how Canadians weren't getting enough sleep. And, there was on average, a lot of people were only getting about 6 hours of sleep a night, which is not enough. We need at least 8 hours of sleep a night. And I don't think that has gotten better. And if anything, for many people, it's gotten worse with COVID because we've had so many changes to our schedules and our lives that has also disrupted our sleep schedules, in addition to, increased stress and anxiety. And in particular, we've got our children at home potentially too, and their schedules are off and their sleep is disruptive. And so what I wanted to do today was first and foremost, convince you to take a moment to think about your sleep schedule, your family's sleep schedule, and what whether or not you think it's adequate. And what I also wanted to do was give you what I hope are 6 tips on things that you can do to help improve your sleep. So I've broken them down into what I'm calling the big 3 for your body and the big 3 for your brain. So starting with the body, there are 3 things in our sleep environment that really impact our sleep, basically. And we use them all the time to either help us stay awake or, in the bedroom setting can actually help us stay awake in a bad way. So the first one is temperature. Your body is paying attention to the environment even when you're sleeping. And so if there's alerts in the environment that are like temperature that are telling your body you need to do something to either cool down or warm up, it wakes you up and it keeps you from having a good deep sleep. And so temperature is one. All of you have had probably a night where you were too hot or too cold, and you know how you keep waking up. And so do take a moment to set the temperature to your room appropriately with the right clothes and the right bed covers, etc. Number 2 is sound. Any unusual noises usually can wake us up, and you usually have 2 groups of people with sound, either people who need it to be completely silent, or people who need a little bit of background noise. So if you think about, for example, somebody that's living on a farm, maybe that's used to crickets in the background, if they're sleeping in a place where there's no noise, that actually is picked up as being unusual for their body, and that wakes them up. So you need to figure out a little bit which of those 2 scenarios you are. If you're the person who needs no sound, you need to make efforts to keep your environment quiet. And probably the easiest thing to do in that scenario is to purchase comfortable earplugs and sleep with them. If you're the person who needs a little bit of noise, I would recommend white noise. There's tons of apps out there, lots of different, opportunities. Some people like a fan, some people like a TV, static. Find the one that works for you. The nice thing about that is it can kind of cover up some of the background noise and help you sleep better. The third one is a pain in that it's light. And so 2 things again here. You need your room to be very dark. We're talking cave dark, and put some effort into achieve that. So, get rid of alarm clocks that have the bright lights. Purchase some dark out curtains. And short of that, if you don't have the money to spend on curtains, put up cardboard. I mean, right now, I think sleep trumps aesthetics. And so get your room dark. The other thing with light is that your brain uses light to decide or to tell you when you're awake and when it's time for bed. And so one of the challenges for humans is that we have so much light in our world now that's artificial light that it can throw off that schedule. And so we do want to try, particularly to try and avoid what's called blue light, which is the brightest light in the day. And where a lot of that blue light is coming from is our devices. And so ideally, I want you to walk away from your device about a half an hour before bed. Or if you can't do that, make sure that you're setting your devices to the amber light at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night so that you're not getting that bright blue light into your brain just before you go to bed. It's like tricking your body into having the sunset. Okay, so those are the 3 things you can do to help your body sleep. The 3 things that you can do to help your brain sleep are a little linked. If I start again, sort of with that idea of devices, one of the first things we need to do is kind of shut down the thinking before bed. I kind of think of it as doing more simple or dumber activities, right? So you don't want to be reading the news. You don't want to be engaging in a gripping drama on TV. You want to be engaging in activities that are going to be a little more boring. I personally like puzzles, like crossword puzzles. Coloring, I think, is a fantastic one. And actually, I'll let you use your device if you want to use a coloring app with the amber light. Or I think actually Candy Crush is a good dull one to just get you to stop thinking. The second thing is you need to set a schedule. Good sleep is a behavior, right? And you can train behaviors just like you can train your pet, but to do it, you have to do it regularly. And so you need to identify a bedtime that works for you, and try to stick within it about a half an hour on either side of that bedtime. Most humans find it easiest to fall asleep after 9 o'clock. Men tend to have a little bit harder time than women actually falling asleep earlier in the evening. So you may need to adjust a little bit back. But set the schedule. a half an hour before, start doing your activity that's slowing down your thoughts. Make sure you're turning off the blue lights during that time. And then knowing that a behavior change takes about 40 days. So try to really commit to the change. And I'm almost out of time, but the last one I want to talk to actually reflects back to what Diana was talking about as well, which is once you get in bed, you still find your head might start spinning again and worrying. And I think it's really valuable at that moment to try and practice that mindfulness. There are a million great apps out there. I like Calm. You can combine actually the white noise with the meditation app to help you fall asleep. But there's lots of little mental exercises you can do to distract yourself. The most common one is just walking through your body parts and saying, feet, relax, knees, relax. But you can also, imagine the colors of the rainbow and try and picture each color in your mind. They can be really simple exercises that just take you into the moment and stop you from obsessing about the other things. So my last little thought is that hopefully, or probably you've been thinking about yourselves along those points, but think about your kids too. If you have kids at home, try and help them get back onto a schedule, because I think their schedules are disrupted as well, and apply some of the same things because people and kids that get sleep are happier people. So I think I will stop there and open it up for questions. Thank you for listening.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sandra, for that. That was wonderful. It definitely got me thinking about my own sleep patterns, which are probably not the best once I listen to that. But I'm sure everyone, again, is, we're all going through this. So the situation is kind of unique to what we normally experience. So I'm sure we're all thinking about how things have changed for us or things that we can do to help improve. So if everyone wants to come back, you can turn our cameras on. And I have questions already, which is fantastic. So I think maybe what I will do is start with this one, because it can kind of go to either Sandra or Diana, maybe if you both want to answer. So there was a question about tips for going back to sleep if you wake up in the middle of the night. So because this actually happens to me as well. So I'm curious to see what you have to say. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you cannot fall back asleep and you're struggling, what do you do?
So I don't know if Diana and I would answer similarly. I actually find two things depending a little bit. First and foremost, I often wake up at like 5 a.m. and my brain is worrying about what I have to do the next day. And so one of the things that I try to do is the same thing that I do when I go to sleep, which is to try and bring myself through a boring mental exercise and focus on my breathing and just try to push those thoughts out of my mind. Sometimes though, I also am like, got my shoulders up around my ears and I'm anxious and so that's not working for me. And so I actually get out of bed and do a few stretches just to loosen things up and then try to go back to bed and do it again. Because a little bit is turning it off. I don't know if Diana would add to that.
Well, I think there are lots of different reasons why people would wake up. So in the middle of the night. So what I see a lot, because I work with people who have anxiety, is that the anxiety is what's waking them up in the night. So part of what can help with that is developing like a good sleep, developing good sleep hygiene. So developing a good practice before you go to bed. So, and Sandra has certainly spoken to that, like learning to relax yourself and calm yourself before you go to bed. But the other thing is if you are feeling anxious about a lot of things, you need to address that anxiety during the day. So what I find is really common is people will distract themselves all day long because they don't want to feel the anxiety. And then when they, when they lie down to go to bed, guess what happens? All that anxiety's been sitting there all day. So it all comes sort of rushing forward, right? So either it interferes in their ability to calm and go to sleep, or it wakes you up in the middle of the night. And then often the worst thing you can do is, if you wake up and you start having all these anxious thoughts, is then you start getting anxious about not sleeping, which just makes the whole thing worse, right? So so that's one thing you can try to do is try not to build on that anxiety, and tell yourself, yes, I'm going to be tired tomorrow, but it's not the end of the world. I can function, without getting all the sleep I need for tonight. It's, at least you can sort of do that. But I often recommend to people that they do like a body scan relaxation, maybe before they go to bed. There's body scans for sleep. Sandra mentioned some of these, the apps like Calm and Headspace, and they often have meditations that are geared towards sleep as well. But the main thing is people need to learn to deal with their worries and their anxiety during the day. You can't just live in a state of distraction and avoid stuff and then expect to sleep okay. And that, because that's the nature of it. And that happens to everybody when they have a lot of anxiety. Their sleep is impaired for sure.
Yeah, and I guess at this time, I mean, like I said, I'm sure a lot of people are going through a lot of different things, and so that's coming out in different ways as well. I've actually noticed that when I write stuff down, it's out of my brain, which is really helpful for me. It doesn't always work every single time, but it's something that I've been trying, and I find that that's helpful. So if anybody else wants to try that, you never know. Okay, so on that, you did mention the apps. So is it helpful to try to find something, like if you're trying different things, nothing else is working, is an app a really good alternative to other options? Or how do you know if you should be using a device to help you sleep or to start a routine or something like that?
I think there was a question about like apps like Headspace and Calm. There's many apps right now that help people sort of practice mindfulness. What I find is that if you like apps and if you like the reminder, like a lot of apps will remind you during the day to, take a minute or two and breathe. If that works for you, then that's great. I work with a lot of people that find them really helpful. So if you think it might help, great, try it. Personally, I don't use apps, but that's just me. I think it's a personal preference, really.
Okay. Okay, we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to see if I can put them in some sort of order that makes sense for everybody. But on that, we just had a question come in from Jen. So Allison, this might be a question for you. Is there such a thing as bed ergonomics and proper body position, or a specific way that you should be sleeping?
Well, so ergonomics is trying to solve perhaps the person's interface with their work. That's basically ergonomics. Oh, sorry, is that I read that as bad ergonomics, but it's maybe bed ergonomics. I have no idea. However, there's no bad ergonomics, and so bed ergonomics. That's there's going to be quite a few things that come into play there that I probably can't address properly, not knowing the person's sort of medical background and whether they have ongoing musculoskeletal concerns that that would have to be considered. Things like low back pain and neck pain do have a role to play in how comfortable you can get in bed, and so there are things that can be done there. But typically ergonomics is sort of a workplace setting, or otherwise you do see it applied in terms of athletes and sports situations. But yeah, now I'm sort of interested in specific sleep ergonomics here. I'm going to have to go look that one up.
Well, I think it's actually a really interesting question because I've never thought about it that way before. But I mean, there are special pillows and different types of blankets and beds and toppers and all these other things. So I guess I don't know how do you know what product to buy to help you? I mean, is that something that maybe if you have a family physician, like could they help, or perhaps like I don't know. Now I'm curious too because
Yeah.
I've never thought of it that way.
No, I've not thought of it either.
I'll throw out there because
Yeah.
I've looked at a few things, and part of it is certainly the placement of your body so that you're not getting like so for people who want to sleep on their side, they'll often get a stacking of the hips and the knee falling down, and then you'll feel sore, right? And there's always a little bit of a balance because there's getting your body in a good position where it's relaxed and sort of stretched out in non-harmful ways. But then there's also like the behaviors where people feel most comfortable falling asleep, which doesn't always work for the entire night, right? So if you really, if you're committed, you can try and find a comfortable sleeping position. And most people like on the back. But if you're not committed, because you can't fall asleep that way, those devices that you're talking about, the special pillows, they can be really helpful. So for example, there's a pillow that goes in between your knees to help keep your hips the right width apart so that you don't get that collapse. I know too much information, but I'm a stomach sleeper, and big pillows are just the worst because they crank your head back, and you actually can buy a pillow for a stomach sleeper that's very thin, right? So it's like almost all things, you have to find what works best for you. But and there's little back rolls too for people that have a little bit of curve in their back to also take the dip off their back to help them not have back pain. So anyways.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's nice to talk about it and hear what other people do and what your experiences are. I actually sleep with no pillows, so which some people think is very strange. But I got used to it and it seems to work, so I just roll with it, and it works for me. Okay, we'll switch gears.
It's just so important to get your sleep that you need to do whatever you need to do to make it a successful sleep, right?
For sure. I agree with that. And again, we're talking about this in this very interesting time. And of course, if you can't sleep, it's your day is just not going to go well at all. So it's definitely really important. I agree. Okay. We've got a really interesting question from Amy. So this has to do with workplace, and how employees can talk with their employers about their mental health issues. So it could be, so she's asking about either frontline workers or people working from home. So how can you ensure that those conversations happen? Is there a way that they should happen? And I guess what can employees do and what can employers do to make sure that they're facilitating those types of conversations and making sure that the other party sort of knows what they're going through and what the situation is?
Okay, I don't know if Sandra and Allison also want to sort of say something about this. I mean, it's a complicated question. I think employers can do a lot at their end in terms of providing an EAP plan, promoting discourse in the work environment about mental wellness and encouraging people to reach out to resources. They can offer workshops, training, information sessions. So there's lots of things employers can do. But the question was sort of asking, how can employees talk to employers? So, I think that would really depend on your workplace and how much safety you feel. I think in terms of having those conversations, if you do have an EAP plan and you're really not sure what you should raise, then that might be a way to start. Connect with somebody who you can talk to about, well, so this is the issue. What would be the best way to sort of approach it, and with who, right? Because a lot of workplaces, there's lots of hierarchy. So it could depend on at what level you want to have those conversations. I think as a society, we're definitely talking a lot more about mental wellness and mental health, which is great. But, lots and lots of people still struggle with feeling like there's something really wrong with them, or, like I said before, negatively judging themselves. I see this in almost everyone I work with. Like they're coming to therapy and they're, they know this is a good thing. This is something they need to do, but they're still sometimes struggling with, does this mean I'm crazy? Does this mean like I'm, all of these negative things? So we still have a lot more work to do, I think, in terms of helping people understand what counseling and therapy is all about, and how it can be beneficial, and why maybe you should seek out supports and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I feel like I've been rambling a bit, but I don't know if Sandra and Allison have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would just add, this is a real opportunity, I think. I mean, both for the employers or the leaders within an organization, but also the co-workers within the organization, to say to people, to give them the opportunity to feel safe and develop those relationships. And I mean, I listened to Diana talk, and it makes me feel so good for her to say, hey, if you're having a day today and you're just not motivated, recognize that and say, okay, today I'm not motivated. Why not? Right? I think it's equally empowering to have somebody in your workplace say to you, hey, Sandra, we know that life is hard right now, and I don't expect you to be your best every day. And we're all doing the best you can, and just acknowledge that we're all there amongst each other. And I think the leaders within the organization can kind of have that acknowledgement with their groups. But I also think employees can kind of say that to each other as well, and just say, my kids are home all the time, or, I'm so worried about my parents, or all the things that are changing around us. Just acknowledging them in each other and knowing that we're all going through this together. I think that's really helpful, and gives us a moment to go, it's okay. I'm doing 70% today. I'm doing 30% today. That's as good as I can do today, and it's okay, right? Yeah, I've seen organizations do that, and it's really powerful, and it actually builds up the team and makes them better, and more capable, and like Diana said as well, resilient to keep going.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I think it's a really good point to emphasize the idea of having that support system, and having that community behind you too. And, if you are in the workplace and you do see somebody who is kind of struggling that day or having a bad day, like I definitely think that it's okay to acknowledge it, and help that person in any way you can. And sometimes that's just saying, like you're both saying, it's okay to have a bad day. People have bad days, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Okay, so I have a question that came in here about looking at. We're going to switch back to ergonomics for a minute. Looking at children and ergonomics, and if there are any suggestions on how they can use their devices. So I know, especially for me, a lot of my friends' kids have iPads, and so they're not necessarily sitting in one location. They're kind of all over with them. They carry them around everywhere, including the bathroom. So how do you combat ergonomics for children who are doing school from home or doing other things on other devices?
Yeah, I suppose all the same principles that I sort of highlighted at the start would still apply for a child who is trying to work, to actually do schoolwork on their computer. If they are using a tablet, you can still get external keyboards and mice to connect to some of those types of tablets for sure. And then there's Bluetooth options that are expanding the offerings there. And I know I definitely got external mice for my children to be able to do their work. So that's one thing. I still don't see, I mean, my kids don't sit down for hours at a time to try and hammer out homework. It's kind of a, 15 minutes and then they're gone again. And they're just very dynamic movers. So you're not going to probably see the same static positioning, but yes, I do find them curled up on the couch with the screen this far away from them playing Minecraft for hours at a time. And there is a decent amount of concerning literature regarding that children are becoming more nearsighted earlier in their lives. And that is of concern. So if you have a way to cast from the pad to an external monitor, you might want to implement some rules about how often they're, a foot away from their screen. So that would be an easy solution, perhaps. And of course, if you have numerous kids, it's always going to be a fight about who's watching what. So I recognize the issues there. But yeah, somehow getting the what they're viewing up onto a bigger screen would be helpful. And then, research has also shown that one of the best things to combat that nearsightedness is to send them outside and play, and then they're having to look far away. So that's my solution for everything, is to send them out into the woods to play.
I think that's a pretty valid solution. It's beautiful outside, so there's no reason to not go outside. Okay, so speaking of research, you all have research projects that you work on regularly. So I actually have a question for you. Is there one thing, if you could tell everyone about your research, that kind of relates back to this conversation? Is there one thing that you would tell us about what you're doing or what you've even found in your research that can help our audience better understand the things that we're talking about today? You can think about it for a second.
Well, I'll kick off while the other two are thinking. I know they have some stuff to definitely say. Now my research is not necessarily in ergonomics so much anymore. I'm definitely into the virtual reality environment for learning tasks. So possibly I don't have much relevant to say, but something that Sandra had mentioned when we were talking about how do you talk to your workplace. And I had a strong student who actually worked with Dr. Kahalik as well. And he was very interested in this idea of safety culture, and it ends up being one of the most protective things that can happen in a workplace. So if the belief that safety is of utmost importance to the workers is coming from the highest level, and it's a true and intent that they want their workers to be safe, it just permeates the whole culture of the workplace. It's very hard to achieve, and it's very hard to get it filtered down to the levels, but it is a really powerful concept. So even if you're a small business owner at this time, reading up on some of that could make the difference at this point when we have a lot of different things coming into play in the workplace. So it's not my research. I know of it. And I thought I'd put a plug in for it. So maybe the other two can chime in.
For sure. That's actually definitely interesting. So it makes me wonder if, we're talking about mental health and wellness, of course. So does that apply, to the idea of having that representation of mental health and wellness and that community within the organization, again, coming from that level down, if it's within the workplace, will it make the same difference as what Allison's referring to?
Yeah, it's protective for the mental health piece, as well as the traumatic and fatal incidences that happen.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, I'll let you both talk.
Okay, I'll try to keep this really brief. So, mindfulness is about self-awareness, and ultimately I think if you want to be an effective, healthy person, you need to have self-awareness. Like, you need to have this ability to look internally and identify what you're thinking and feeling so that you can make decisions about that, right? And that's the power of mindfulness, this ability to make decisions about your feelings. So a lot of the kids we work with, for example, when they develop more self-awareness, they actually can identify what they're feeling and they're allowed to express it. What happens then is they get to a point where they can actually make decisions. So a simple example is, you're in the schoolyard and somebody does something and it makes you mad. Instead of reacting and getting into a fight, they tell us, I made a decision to walk away and go and tell the teacher, right? So without that ability to pay attention and focus, life is really hard because you're potentially always being triggered. And right. So like when I go to the grocery store, this is a super simple example, and I notice, whoa, most people are not wearing a mask. If I start to get anxious about that and I'm not aware of it, the anxiety will take over and control my behavior rather than me noticing it and making a decision. Okay, yeah, I feel this, but, because of this and this and this, I'm going to be okay. Right. So yeah, that's why it's so important to practice this ability to pay attention and focus. And a lot of mindful practices are about that, right? They're about, like, a lot of the meditative exercises are about learning to focus internally, and that's a real skill, and you need to practice it. And believe me, it's really, really hard if you're distracted, if you're like the kind of person that's used to just going from one thing to the next thing, and you're never kind of really focused on what you're doing, you're always thinking ahead, and a lot of people live their life like this. It's really hard when all of a sudden you start to try and do this, right? So I always tell people, like, expect to be frustrated, but set yourself up for success. So don't go off and try to meditate for 20 minutes or something, right? Like, literally just try to do it for 30 seconds. If you can do that, great. Then try to do it for a minute, right? And a lot of us have these, like we were talking about apps earlier, like, I have a watch, and I have a little breathing thing, and it'll come up throughout the day and remind me just to kind of breathe for a minute. It's one of those things you focus on and it goes in and out like that. It doesn't have to be like a long practice, right? So, and I can give you an example, like, I work with a lot of university students, and like one of my students was telling me, she's in third year and she trained with me this past year, but she was saying, like, at the beginning of the year, when she would do her work, she might have 4 or 5 things on the go at the same time. And she might be able to concentrate on something for a few minutes, and then she'd go to the next thing and the next thing. You might have music on and whatever, social media and all this stuff. And now she's able to actually work on one thing, for a sustained period of time and get that done before she moves on to the next thing. So she's a much more effective student because of it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Especially, there's always so much going on all the time. And society is super fast paced. And you bring up social media, which is also super fast paced. So when you're starting to keep up with all of those things, I think you can definitely lose sight of perhaps, what's at task at hand right then, and definitely get distracted. So I think that's a really good point to bring up. Sandra, I don't want to take too much time, so I'll let you come in if you have something to say to that.
It actually, I think, builds nicely on the previous. So my area of research is predominantly on health promotion, disease prevention, right? And I find a lot of my time when I'm talking to people, it's not talking about the thing you need to do, because people know what the healthy choices typically are. It's the behavior change, right? And behavior is the hardest. And so how do you make change and then make the change successful? Because most of us can make a change for like a day, but not necessarily for a year, right? And so whether you're talking about sleep and trying to get a sleep habit started, or whether you're talking about mindfulness and trying to get a mindfulness habit started, you know, couple of things to keep in mind. One is a general rule of thumb is it takes at least 40 days for a new habit to develop. And so you don't need to hold yourself to such a tight regular rule that if you fail one of those 40 days, you failed. But you do have to recognize that you're not going to be changed in 7 days, right? It's going to take much longer. And especially if you're breaking a habit, it may take longer than 40 days too, right? So that's important. And in that same line, you want to set the bar low, because if you set the bar too high, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so it's exactly what Diana was saying. You're not going to start meditating for 40 minutes a day if you've never meditated before. You are going to fail at that. So do a minute. And I can use that example with exercise. You're not going to start running, 10 kilometers every day if you've never run before. In fact, don't even go there. Start with a walk. The important thing is the consistency of it and the scheduling of it, and that it's something you can actually achieve. If you can't achieve it on day 1 or day 2, you're not going to be able to keep doing it. And then the third thing I'll just throw out there is that, I think that we inherently know what we need to focus on first for our personal health. So it may be sleep, it may be mindfulness, it may be physical activity, it may be better eating. And ask yourself what's right for you and follow it. And then what you find is that good habits beget more good habits. So follow your own message that way. And I see that Eve is back, so I will stop talking, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today. I love talking about this stuff. I just love talking, and I just love stuff. But it's wonderful to have these conversations and be able to again address the strange things that everyone is kind of experiencing in terms of their health, sleep, wellness. Even all of our work experiences at this point, because we're all in different locations, and it's not something that we're used to right now. So again, thank you. It's wonderful. And I will also turn it back to Eve now.
Thanks, Katrina. Laurentian University is very fortunate to have partnered with Science North to bring the seminar series to the city of Greater Sudbury. Thank you to Julie Mokulik, the science director, and the team that have worked make it seem seamless, including Julia Halleck, Renata Bren, and Katrina Pisani. At Laurentian University, we have had a number of people from different departments all work together to make this a reality. Thank you to all of my colleagues throughout the university who supported this initiative, with a special call out to Jillian Schultz and Jonathan Mignon. Finally, Allison Goodwin, Diana Kolick, and Sandra Dorman, your insights have been invaluable. What an amazing conversation with important insights for us and for everyone around us. As a reminder, our last seminar in this series will be next week. We hope to see you next Wednesday, June 24th, La Saint-Jean-Baptiste, from 10 to 11:30, 30 minutes longer. We have 5 amazing speakers planned from Laurentian University, Health Sciences North, the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, and the Sudbury and District Health Unit. The topic for this seminar will be the effects of the pandemic on health sciences, research, and innovation. The panelists will focus on how COVID-19 will influence our community and society in the future. I am certain this will be a lively discussion. La semaine prochaine, nous accueillons 5 chercheurs en provenance de l'Université Laurentienne, d'Horizon Santé Nord, de l'École de médecine du Nord de l'Ontario et du service de santé de Sudbury et du district. Le thème de ce séminaire est le suivant: les effets de la pandémie sur les sciences de la santé, la recherche et l'innovation. Je suis certain qu'il s'agirait d'une discussion très animée. On behalf of Laurentian University and Science North, I'm Yves Pelletier. Thank you for joining us today. Merci, miigwech.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. What a great panel. Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Oh, so awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.